There is a very good chance that somewhere in your house right now, probably in a bedroom, an office, a sunroom, or that one room that turns hateful every summer afternoon, you are fighting heat in the most expensive way possible. You close the blinds, you pull the curtains, you switch on a fan, maybe you turn the AC lower than you wanted to, and still the room keeps heating up like it has its own personal relationship with the sun. And by the end of this video, you are going to know a very cheap, very unglamorous, almost insultingly simple way to make one of those rooms noticeably easier to live in, because it attacks the problem at the point where the problem actually starts, not after the heat is already in the room, before it gets through the glass in the first place. Because this is the part most people get wrong. They think the battle is happening inside the room. They think the curtains are the defense, or the blackout blinds, or the portable ACRE, or the fan blowing hot air around, like it is accomplishing something meaningful. But once sunlight has already passed through the glass, a huge part of the damage is already done. The room has already taken the hit. The window has already become a kind of heat trap. The sun comes in as light, gets absorbed by the surfaces inside, and then re-radiates as heat. So now you are not preventing heat. You're managing heat that already made it into your life. And that is why this old, boring, almost never talked about trick is so good. The material is usually called solar screen fabric or exterior shade cloth, and the reason it works so much better than normal curtains is that it sits outside the window, not inside. That sounds like a tiny distinction. It is not. It is the whole game. Because if you block a large percentage of the sun before it ever hits the glass stays cooler, the room behind it takes less radiant punishment, and the air conditioning, fan, or whatever else you are using indoors is no longer trying to clean up a mess the sun has already made. And there are really two versions of this. The more purpose-built version is exterior solar screen fabric, the kind made specifically for windows. One common example is Pfeiffer Suntex 80, and products in that category are designed to block a big chunk of heat and glare while still letting you see out. The more budget-friendly version is HDPE shade cloth, the same family of material people use on pergolas, patios, and gardens. It is not quite as elegant, and it is not as window-specific, but if you mount it outside the problem window, it can get you surprisingly close to the same basic effect for a lot less money. And the price difference is what makes this especially interesting. A dedicated solar screen material can still be very reasonable, but the true budget play right now is shade cloth. A simple 70% to 90% UV block shade cloth roll is cheap enough that for a typical small window, the raw material can work out to only a few dollars. That means this is not one of those videos where the cheap fix turns out to require a custom contractor install and a second mortgage. The proper version exists, but so does the scrappy version, and for a lot of people, the scrappy version is the one worth trying first. Now here's the part that makes this more than just a clever-sounding idea. Canada's National Research Council says, exterior screens may reduce solar heat gains by more than 80% compared to unshaded windows. More than 80%. That is not room temperature hype. That is not influencer math. That is the actual mechanism you care about. How much solar heat gets through the window in the first place? And once you hear that number, the whole thing starts making a lot more sense. Of course, outside shading works better than inside curtains. It is intercepting the heat before the glass becomes part of the problem. And this is also why I do not want to oversell this in the wrong way. I'm not going to tell you every room drops some guaranteed number of degrees because that depends on the room, the window size, the orientation, the wall construction, the outdoor temperature, your ventilation, and whether the room was basically a greenhouse to begin with. If I ever mentioned degrees in a video like this, I would do it carefully. If a room dropped, say 3 to 5 degrees Celsius, that would be about 5.4 to 9 degrees Fahrenheit for the American friends. But the stronger and more honest number here is not a universal room temperature promise. It is that outside screens can cut solar heat gain at the window by more than 80%. That is the number that explains why the room often feels so different afterward. What is so funny about this is that it has strong, forgotten old trick energy, even though the logic is almost embarrassingly obvious once somebody says it out loud. If sunlight through glass is what is heating the room, then stop the sunlight before the glass. That is it. That is the insight. And yet most people never hear it framed that way, where they spend money on indoor fixes for what is fundamentally an outdoor problem, which is a bit like discovering rain is coming through an open window and then deciding the smartest response is to buy a better mop. And this is not even new. Old houses already knew this. Historically, awnings, shutters, overhangs, and other exterior shading devices were used not just because weather exists, but because people understood, very practically, that if you keep the sun off the window, the room stays cooler. The National Park Service explicitly notes that awnings and similar shading devices were used to reduce heat gain, glare, and cooling loads. In other words, the ancestors were not stupid. They were just doing with wood, canvas, and shutters what people now can do with cheap mesh and a few clips. Now let's make it practical, because this is where the video starts earning its keep. If you have one room that overheats badly, especially from a west-facing or south-facing window, the most interesting low-cost experiment you can do is a single-window exterior shading test. Not the whole house, not a giant weekend project, just one problem window. If you want the better-looking, more purpose-built version, get exterior solar screen fabric. If you want the budget version, get 70% to 90% shade cloth. Cut it slightly larger than the glass area and mount it outside the window with a small air gap between the material and the glass. That gap matters, because the point is to stop and dissipate solar energy before it reaches the pane full force. And the budget build really can be extremely simple. You can attach the cloth to a lightweight wood strip frame, clip it onto an existing exterior frame, or hang it with hooks and bungees if you need a renter-friendly test. It does not have to be beautiful on day one. The point is to test the effect honestly. Once that is up, compare the room over the next few hot afternoons to how it felt before. Not in a vague way. Pay attention. How hot is the floor near the window? How aggressive is the temperature rise? Does the AC cycle less? Does sitting near that wall feel better? Is the glare reduced? Does the room stay usable for longer? And what makes this such a good video subject is that the payoff is not abstract. People can actually see this one. They can stand in front of a shaded window and an unshaded one and often feel the difference. They can notice that one room is no longer punishing them for having the audacity to exist on the sunny side of the house. They can watch the harsh light soften. They can touch surfaces that are less oven-like than they used to be. This is not magic. It is just intercepting solar energy earlier in the chain. There is also a nice secondary benefit that people tend not to think about until after the fact, which is comfort beyond temperature. Because the room is not only cooler, it is often calmer, less glare on screens, less eye strain, less bleaching of furniture, rugs, books, and wood floors, less of that constant afternoon brightness that makes a room feel aggressive even before it feels hot. So you are not just cooling the room, you are softening the way the room behaves. Now, there is one mistake people make here that is worth saying clearly, because this is exactly the kind of thing that turns a clever fix into a dumb one. A lot of people here reflect heat away from the window, and immediately start thinking about shiny reflective material pressed directly against the inside of the glass. And sometimes that can backfire, especially with certain double pane windows, because it can trap heat in the wrong place and create stress on the glass. So the safer and usually better performing version of this idea is outside shading, not reflective material stuck directly to the inside of the window. The whole reason this works so well is that you're intercepting the sun before it gets through the glass, not trying to bounce it back after it has already crossed the boundary. In fact, once you know this, there's a very simple little heat audit you can do in your own house. And it is the sort of thing that makes you instantly smarter about where your discomfort is actually coming from. First, identify the one room that overheats the fastest and note what time of day it happens. Second, look at which windows are taking direct sun during that time, because that is often the whole mystery solved in 5 seconds. Third, stand near those windows and pay attention to the difference between direct solar gain and general warm air. One feels like the room is hot, the other feels like the sun itself is attacking your furniture. Fourth, test the cheapest version of exterior shading you can manage on the worst window first, because you learn more from one visible before and after than from 6 videos about home cooling hacks that never show a real result. The point is not to become a building scientist. It is to stop treating all heat as the same problem when a big chunk of it is just direct sun through glass. And once you start seeing that, a lot of frustrating summer experiences make more sense. Why one room is always worse than the others. Why curtains help a bit, but never feel like enough. Why the AC seems to lose its mind every afternoon. Why the office by the sunny window turns into a punishment chamber while the hallway stays completely tolerable. The sun is not heating every part of the house equally. It is targeting specific glass openings, and those openings are acting like giant weak points. Exterior shading is one of the cheapest ways to reinforce them. So if you want the plain English version of the lesson, it is this. The best time to stop heat from a sunny window is before the sun hits the glass, not after. Not once the curtains are glowing and the desk is hot, and the room has already started storing that heat in every surface. Before. And that is why a boring bit of mesh or outside a window can sometimes outperform much more expensive fixes inside the room. It is working upstream. Which is why I love this as a piece of practical knowledge. It feels old, it feels obvious once you know it. It feels slightly ridiculous that it is not common knowledge, and above all, it feels rewarding. because this is exactly the kind of fix ordinary people can test without remortgaging the house, replacing their windows, or pretending the answer to every comfort problem is just buy a bigger AC. So the next time one room in your house starts turning into a greenhouse, remember that the most useful cooling trick may not be inside the room at all. It may be the cheap material on the outside of the window that stops the problem before the problem gets in. That's it for me today. I hope you learned a lot, and I'll see you in the next one.